Playing online and on smart devices. Now on London Scotty Radio, it's podcast time. I'm George Matlock. Welcome to Scottie MOT, the health and wellbeing show from London's Scottie Club. As listeners may know, we have been discussing the cost of living in relation to raising a Scottie all of this month. It led to a poll, which findings were read out on the show last time with Jackie Ash, and we also vowed to carry on talking about it today. No, not like a broken record, but rather to get today's guest's perspective on it. Because our guest today takes the credit for totting up all the costs of raising a Scottie. No pressure. We will also be looking at a topic that we didn't include in the cost of raising a Scottie, but perhaps we should. More about that later. So first of all, let me introduce and welcome back onto the show Cath Marchbank, who's the welfare officer at the Scottie charity Stex. And hello to you.
Hello, George.
Great to have you back on the programme. So how does it feel to be Mrs. Money?
Oh, gosh. It's listening to the figures that you gave out last week with Jackie. It's a little bit frightening, isn't it?
Indeed it is. Indeed it is. We'll be looking at those numbers in just a moment. So let's build up to that. But first of all, I should just say that, we started this convo, back at the start of May. And here we are now, and it's all your fault. But no, seriously, your numbers were really instrumental, Cath, and thanks to you, we've been able to work out a whole of life budget plan for as we now call it through this program. So I think it's been really, really helpful, and I hope that a lot of people will certainly be noting these numbers down and letting us know how they feel about it. Because I think it's important to get listeners' feedback as well. But just to, first of all, recap for the audience, the question that we posed in a London Scottie Club poll this month was, how much money does your Scottie cost you over 5 years, 10 years and 15 years? Well, the figures were really rather revealing, weren't they, Cass? Do you remember what they were?
Oh, gosh, yeah, very revealing, very frightening. Yeah, it's...
So let's go over these numbers quickly then. So over 5 years, it would cost you just over £81,000 to raise a Scottie. Over 10 years, £155,000, and over 15, £228,000. We even joked that you could get a Bentley for that money and include 2 years of servicing, I think.
Yep.
What did you make of that?
I'd still rather have the dogs than the car, like Jackie said, but those figures, people don't realise how much it does cost to look after a dog properly. Yeah. And this is why we're seeing so many given up to rescues, not just the Scotties, but other breeds of dogs as well. The local dogs homes, rescue centres, they're absolutely inundated with dogs. People going back to work, not being able to afford the upkeep of the dogs and handing them in. Yeah.
So on the programme last week, we did share as well the breakdown as a Word file attachment. If anyone would like to see inspect the numbers, you can find them on the previous episode of this podcast, as we now call it. Remember, these numbers were calculated at 2022 prices. We don't know what's in store in the coming years. But so the numbers themselves, when you were looking at these numbers, what did you have in your mind to say over 5 years what it might cost to own a Scottie?
I was probably thinking more 50 grand. Yeah. The absolute tops. Mm-hmm. I think the figures that we've put together, some people might never go on holiday, so they don't have the kennelling costs or the holidays. They take the dogs everywhere with them. They might go to a caravan site where, camping and caravanning where they don't charge extra for the dogs. So we've done it on the bigger scale, where you are having to pay per night per dog,
Yeah.
extra money, and feeding the best quality food. So it is at the top end of figures, but it's also, it can be more than that, because if you end up with a specialist diet, then we didn't take the figures on those specialist bags of
That's right.
veterinary diet.
Indeed, and you're absolutely right in terms of the cost. So we kind of played it pretty much average. We went for the kind of line of best fit, so for the middle. We went for better quality food, so the food that we know comes from reputable manufacturers, where the food is produced in a way that we will be happy to and confident to give to our pets. So they're not the cheapest products, but at the same time they're not the most expensive, which would then be, as you say, we're going to another level if we're talking about specialist food for dogs that have certain conditions, and that may be the case for some owners. So in terms of looking at these numbers, then, I mean, as I say, the breakdown is all there. We actually took a figure of about £600 a year for the calculation for food. And as I say, some people will be able to shell out a lot less. We saw around 350 is the sort of baseline for this. But you could be looking at £1,000 a year if you're looking at specialist foods.
Yeah.
So all of these things to be taken into consideration. But, even that £600, even over 5 years, that is, £3,000, isn't it? Yeah,
that's it. We all live, in the now, don't we? And we don't look back at what we've actually spent, which I think in hindsight is a good thing. But, realistically, we've got to look, start with the heating costs going up and, bigger bills coming in, price of fuel. In the paper it's just said that dog food is one of the main things that's increased again in price, and you're looking at a 10% increase.
Absolutely.
So
Inflation
the prices
is the problem. It all adds up, and of course, even if your more conservative estimate, which as you say was £50,000 over 5 years, were to be the case, even if you and it may well be, it may be that is the number that you're comfortable with quoting, because that's what you think you need to spend. Perhaps you don't ever go on holidays. Yeah, you look like a sort of person who never goes on holidays, actually. Actually, I'm surprised you ever get a chance to get a holiday, and actually with all the hours that you have to do at Stex. But no, seriously though, you may already have in your mind what it costs. I mean, you're certainly no novice to having Scotties. I know you've had them for many, many years. But, so you've probably got an idea in your mind that that's the sort of budget. But even if it is just 50 grand as opposed to 81,000, think of it this way: that's 10,000 a year over 5 years. That's 10,000. Which is basically your electricity bill,
definitely
at the new prices, the way things are going.
Yeah.
So it really does, and and then you've got mortgages are going to get more expensive because interest rates are going up. The Bank of England is already raising rates and will presumably continue to do so if inflation is not brought under control. And yet a lot of the factors that we're now facing are outside of the Bank of England's control, to be fair. What happens in Ukraine, or what happens with oil prices and other things which are causing a lot of these problems, are not within the Bank of England's scope to control. They can't change that.
No.
So they have to live with the consequences, as do consumers ultimately. And that's where, of course, the well-being of our dogs comes into it. So, but I think the numbers were very, very instructive. Now, I mean, do you think the prices will come down? What do you think?
Well, the prices of the dog has come down. From paying £3,000 for a new puppy during lockdown, the prices did increase up to £3,000. We've already seen a decrease in the puppy sale prices. They've dropped down to £1,500.
Wow.
Because the breeders have found that people haven't got the spare cash to splash around. And invested into a dog, so there is a saving made there, but the dog still then needs the veterinary treatment. Veterinary prices have gone up because we've got a shortage of vets. The pandemic has meant that they can't see as many people. They're having to clean down in between seeing clients in the surgery. Hygiene, so where they might have been seeing, one vet might have been seeing maybe 25-30 clients a day, and those numbers have actually halved. A lot of the trainee vets that were coming through from foreign countries they aren't around. So we've got a vast shortage of vets. So the vets that are working of having to put the prices up. A lot of people are struggling to get their animals registered. You know, they buy a new puppy, they ring up the local vets, and the vets say, sorry, we're not taking in on any more clients. So, you know, there's a big vicious circle.
So it's affecting things in two ways. It's affecting in the cost of these services, but it's also affecting the availability of these services. Even if you want to pay, you might not be able to get the service that you need.
That's it. You know, and we've seen the prices of vaccines going up. You know, because it is really the shipping costs, you know, because the price of fuel. That's it. You know, it's sent everything skyrocketing.
Now, I remember on the previous programme you were on a month back, you said that you were paying 50% more for a bag of pet food versus earlier in the year. And that's also, it's all happened in a matter of weeks. Is that still the case, or has there been any further rise in prices?
For the particular brand that I buy, that stayed at the same price on the last bag that I bought. But who knows what's going to happen mid-June, you know, to the end of June. The wholesalers where I go to tends to, you know, price up for the month. So, you know, whatever prices they put on the beginning of the month, it'll stay there till the end. But, you know, with the grain prices going up, you know, the war in Ukraine, you know, we're seeing an awful lot. Even if you're buying a food that's grain-free, there's still other products that are going into it, the oils and things which are mixed in with the food. A lot of that is coming from Russia and Ukraine.
Yeah, that's right.
So,
you
know,
I mean, grain is, I mean, Ukraine is grain, as I always say. I know it rhymes a bit. But yeah, I mean, they're the 5th biggest exporter of grain in the world. So take that out of the equation and you can see immediately how that affects things. That's 20% of the production line out of the picture. So that's less supply coming through, whereas demand is not fading, and so then you get prices rising. I guess that the real problem is that prices won't come down because, I mean, a number of things. I think it's certainly true that producers and retailers are looking at this and saying, well, we've been badly squeezed by the pandemic. In a way, we need to recover our losses that we've sustained over 2 or 3 years. We can't really write them off, but we do need to recoup them somehow. So with the fact that prices are going up, in many cases, that may well be part of the driver for this. And part of the reason why the prices won't come down when they could later come down is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I think once people have got used to paying that higher price,
exactly.
You know, I very much doubt it will come down, really.
Yeah, and I think also another thing to bear in mind is, and this is where I'm trying to be more charitable towards the suppliers, is that I don't think for 1 minute that they're passing on the entire cost that they are sustaining of price rises. I think the way it works is it's one of testing the water. So they'll put the prices up by 10%, and then they'll monitor sales and see how has it affected things. Okay, if there's not more than a dip, they'll feel confident to put another 10% on down the track. Whereas if they find that suddenly sales have just disappeared, well, they'll have to do a price cut and probably go out of business. And I think that's really how businesses are pitched towards this. So they're not necessarily trying to reflect every last penny and put it through to the consumer. I think they're testing the water to see how much they can put on the consumer before the consumer starts resisting.
That's it. But, you know, at the end of the day, we need that product to feed our animals.
Indeed.
So there's always going to be, you know, huge demand for it. So unless we all go back to home cooking for our dogs, but then we're taking, you know, human grade food where supermarkets and butchers had planned to sell so much meat, you know, for the human being, and then we all start going to the butchers and buying food to cook, you know, meat to cook for the dogs, then you know, there'll be a shortage of food for the humans as well. So
that's a very good point. And of course, also, what's all this about home cooking? I don't know how many people remember home cooking. I mean, so many people have been into prepared foods and fast foods and what have you, that the idea of cooking not only for the dog but perhaps for the whole family would be a nice one. But you know, But but it's a very good point. That perhaps that is the way things are going to go. I mean, if I may ask, how can people economise? I mean, can they opt, for example, for cheaper pet food brands? Do you think?
They can, but what you've got to be careful of is if you are introducing a new food, is you've got to introduce it slowly, because a sudden change of diet can upset your dog's system, and then you're down at the vet's, a pack of probiotics and a mixture to stop the runs in the dog. Even if you buy that online, it was £15 last time I bought a tube. At the vets they charge 40 quid for it, or they did. So it can be false economy, so you've got to be careful that what you are changing the dog food for, the brand. It is a similar product like for like, not too big of a difference, because otherwise it's going to be a false economy.
Right. Is it also about the brand, or is it also about what's within the brand? In other words, if you've got a company that makes tinned food, and it makes lamb, it makes beef, makes chicken, makes fish, and various other things, are you able to alternate between those cans every day because the dogs get bored?
With some dogs you can, because they've got a good constitution. But with another certain dog, you might change. The dog's happy with chicken, and you might just change that to beef, and all of a sudden you've got an upset tummy. You do have a protein difference between the various meats. Definitely more oils in a fish. If you're feeding a trout or a salmon or sardines, you've got to look at the oil content. The fat content's very important for our Scotties. So just changing a different flavour can cause an issue.
Okay, well that sounds like very, very good advice indeed.
This is Jenny. I listen to London Scotty Radio podcasts when walking my lovely Scotty Logan. It's the perfect accompaniment to a leisurely dog walk.
I'm Elaine. I like to listen to London Scotty podcast while chilling with a glass of wine and preparing dinner.
It's Max here. I listen to the podcasts in the bubble bath for fab tips.
This is Zelda. I like to do lino cuts of Scotties. That's what I do when I'm listening to the podcast. I listen to them for inspiration.
This is Fraser, the London Scotty Club podcast. It's a great way to end the day.
Thanks, gang. Good to hear from you all again. Let's just go back to now part 2 of the programme. Unfortunately, we've just lost Cath Marchbank. There's a technical problem which involves basically her power amp going out. So unfortunately, we won't get to share the second half of the programme with her. So she'll miss out on what I was about to say. But the good news is she'll be back in a month's time. So thanks again, Cath, for being on the show today. Now, as we reach the middle of the year, there is a deafening topic that we need to explore. As I mentioned earlier in the show, there is perhaps one item that we need to add to the cost of a Scottie today: the holiday season. Now, we included the calculation of the cost of bringing your dog on holiday, as some hotels will allow them for an additional fee. But the accommodation on holiday might not be the only cost that you're looking at. If you plan to visit Europe, for example, there are other things to consider. Now, how has Brexit added to the cost of visiting the continent? Good question, and I've got a very interesting thing to share here with you. As it so happens, I've just had a letter from my vet. There we go, actually 2 letters. One for each of my dogs, Peacush and Pudding. They're both Scotties. And the letter is basically the same print, and it states the following. It's saying Pudding's rabies vaccination is due to expire on the 23rd of June. The rules for pet travel to EU countries and Northern Ireland have changed. This means that Great Britain issued EU Pet Passports can no longer be used. Instead, owners now need to obtain an animal health certificate for every trip made to the EU with their pet. An up-to-date rabies vaccination is one of the requirements for this. If you have plans to travel with Pudding, please contact your vet at least 1 month in advance. Well, it goes on from there. So basically, the same letter there for both of my pets. And what's this all about? Well, First of all, it's rather amazing that the 23rd of June, which is stated in that letter, just so happens to be the 6th anniversary of the Brexit referendum in 2016. And right after that referendum vote, I did actually apply for an EU Pet Passport, which was still valid at the time. I have to admit, though, I've never used it. It's just a bit of paper. It made a nice souvenir, though, really did. And now they're no longer valid. So there you have it. Now, if you're like me, stuck with a passport you can't use, and you maybe never did get to use, it only lasts for a few years and then it expires. Cost me all of about £50 per dog to have that EU Pet Passport. Now, however, in place of that comes a much more expensive proposal. Yes, unfortunately, it is more expensive. And that is that you need these newfangled certificates. They're called the Animal Health Certificate, AHC. And unlike paying £50 and then you can use the passport as many times as you like for the lifetime of the passport, here you get a certificate for each and every time you leave the British border. And that is rather interesting. You'll notice in that letter it also mentioned Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland, unless something has gone wrong here and Boris has given it away, is still part of the United Kingdom and not part of the European Union. However, it turns out that even to travel from mainland Britain to Northern Ireland, you need one of these certificates. So how much do they cost? What's involved? You need them every time you travel. That certainly stacks up. That's going to cost you. Well, it could cost between £250 and £300 to have one of these certificates each and every time you leave the UK. So that's a pretty sore amount of money. Now, how does it work? Well, there are some good bits and some bad bits. Let's start with the good bits. The good bits are that if you travel to one of the Schengen Agreement countries, so these are the countries in mainland Europe that have signed up to allow for free movement of labour and capital, it also means that your pets can travel through all these countries. So you basically are in the UK, you want to travel to France, and you plan to stay in Europe for a bit of a tour, travel around. It's all good. For £300 or thereabouts, you're looking at paying for this certificate to enter France, and having entered France, you can then travel through all the other countries of the Schengen without forking out more money. So you can then travel through, for example, Belgium, Netherlands, Germany, all the way to Poland, and then down and around as much as you like. Go through Romania, all these countries. So that's the good part, that once you're in, you can then travel around. It's valid for up to 3 months, so don't miss the ferry back home, or your dog will go into quarantine coming back into the UK. And that's despite having a valid certificate. It's just expired. That would be pretty expensive and stressful for you as well as for your Scottie. So something to bear in mind. But for the 3 months, you can certainly travel throughout Europe and then come back, and it's all good. The situation, and now why is it up to £300? Well, the reason is this: depends on the language, depends on which country is your first port of call when you leave the UK. If you're going to France, obviously the certificate has to be written in French. If it's going to Spain, it would be in Spanish. If you're going to Germany, in German. If you're going to Denmark, in Danish. You get the idea. So it's that determines to a large part, because the vets actually have to fill out the forms and they have to do it in the correct language. If it's wrong, then it will be invalid. So again, it's really important, and so that's why it all stacks up. But the bit that's unfortunate is that it is only good for the 3 months. If you want to travel more than once a year, you're going to be paying 2 lots of whatever it costs you. So you go twice to any of these countries, you could be looking at up to £300 each time you travel. Now, in the case of the Republic of Ireland, we understand that because it applies on both sides of the border. So people in Republic of Ireland, if they want to come to the UK, they get it completed in English, which is obviously the language of both countries. And so then they will be paying something like, we hear, according to what Cath was telling me in her research, €30. So that's about £20-25. And then they can come to the UK for the 3 month period. It's the same way. I would guess, I'm only guessing here, but I would guess it's a reciprocal amount for anyone travelling from the United Kingdom to the Republic of Ireland. You will also pay the fee if you go to Northern Ireland. Now, as I say, part of the UK, but apparently they introduced this because of the trading agreement for Northern Ireland, which is at the moment a very hot political potato, as you will know from the headlines in the news. However, it's because of an effort to try and stem puppy farming and puppy trafficking across borders. That is why the Northern Ireland is applicable to this new certificate as well. So there you get it. That's the whole idea. That's the story. It's expensive, and so it will be incremental. The more you travel, the more you'll be paying out, and so it's almost better, if you want to try and save some money, it's almost better to plan well in advance a longer trip through Europe, where you go into one country and you then travel through the others over a period of anything up to 3 months. That would be the most cost-efficient way to respect these regulations, and then to come back in time so that there is no quarantine on the way back into the United Kingdom. And if you follow those rules, it sounds like, well, okay, that's one way of doing it. But if you're a regular traveller and you've got a holiday home or somewhere that you want to visit abroad, it's going to start to get expensive. Something to consider. I asked Cath as well in her research whether she would take her dog abroad, and she said not really, no. Doesn't see the value of it. The temperatures are much higher. It's hotter. It's not comfortable for the pet. And then you've got all these hassles. You need to have the rabies jab, which is part and parcel of the application for the certificate. And you need to have at least 21 days prior to travel to have the rabies injection. So you've got basically the rabies has to be given to the dog. The vaccination has to be given a good 21 days before you travel. Okay, that was all that we were going to share with you in part 2, as everyone's now thinking about holidays and it's that time of the year. Unfortunately, without Cath on this particular juncture. Okay, so final thing just to mention to all of you, a quick reminder that if you have a question about the health of your Scottie, you can send it to us for the show. After all, that's what Scottie MOT is all about. So if you don't even need to be a member of London Scottie Club, but why not join us at terrier.scot, now that I mention it. To send us your health question, visit scottie.scot and fill out the short online form. You can add photos or a short video if you think that will help us to understand the issues that you're facing, and we'll endeavour to respond in a forthcoming episode of Scottie MOT. The show is broadcast every 2 weeks and airs Fridays at 9 a.m. London time. So my thanks again to Cath for being a great sport on today's programme, and wishing you all very healthy Scotties. Thanks for listening to London Scottie Radio. This and all our podcasts are available online at londonscottie.club. If you liked it, be sure to subscribe to us from your favourite podcast player app. Also visit us on YouTube for fun videos. And if you have a Scottish Terrier in London or nearby, be sure to join us.